Hey everyone, this is Drake Glider from Chess Mule, 2000 USCF player. Welcome to another episode of Tactical Thursday. Today we will be looking at double attacks and double threats. Here I have a position diagram, and it is white to move. In this game I was white, and black was a 2400 blitz player. I chose Rook f3. Instead, I should have chose f5, and the idea is that after a move like bishop d5, I can play queen g4 check and retain attacking chances. Instead, I played rook f3, and now I want you to pause the video and see if you can find a double attack for black. Okay, I hope you found bishop g4. Very strong move, double attacking e4 and h5, and also f3. If you play bishop d5, the problem is that there's a preliminary rook g3 check, and now after the king moves, you can play queen b1 and save the rook. But after bishop g4, there's not much white can do. This rook is pretty loose, and both of these pieces are hanging. White must play queen b1, but after bishop takes h5, or alternatively rook takes first and then bishop takes h5, the problem is that white doesn't have enough. After rook g3, king h8, and queen e5, there's simply knight f6. In fact, even f6 is possible, but in either case, white's attack is not enough, black is up material, this pawn is way too strong, and black is dead winning. Next position. Okay, here it is black to move, and I was black against the same player. I chose bishop takes f1, and white blundered king takes f1. Thinking that with the knight on e6, he is forking c5 and f8. However, there's actually a way out of this. If white played knight takes f8 first, queen takes f8, and king takes f1, white is doing well. He has opposite colored bishop. However, with the queens on the board, this position is actually like an attack with a piece up for white, since the black king is more exposed than the white king, and this bishop's stronger than this counterpart. In fact, I may do a topic video later for opposite colored bishops with queens on the board. With queens on the board, they tend to have this dynamic where when one king is weaker, it is like an attack with a piece up, because you control the color square that your counterpart cannot control. Pretty interesting topic overall. Anyway, if we go back, instead of knight takes f8, white played king takes f1. Pause the video and see if you can find a way out of this fork for black, using a double attack. Okay, the best move is queen b5, double attacking d5 and f1. In the game, white played queen e2, but after take, and take, and take, black is just doing much better after bishop takes f8. Although he doesn't even need to take right away, he can start with queen h1 check, king f2, take, and now black is dead winning, this pawn is going to roll. Very trivial. So, by playing king takes f1 here, white exposed his king too much. And when you make a check, you have to do something about it, right? So, even when you have a double attack going on yourself, you should be very wary what you're doing with your own pieces. Here is the final position I'm going to talk about. Here it is white to move, and white was again the same player, and I was black. What should white do? The best move is c5, double attacking the queen on b6 and the pawn on e6. And if black reacts with bishop d5, how would you play? The move you should play is queen takes d5. Now black has nothing to do. Black can resign and pack his bags. The problem is after knight takes d5, c b6, knight b6, bishop a6, white is a piece up, and black has absolutely no compensation. That concludes our 3 exercises for double attack. Now let's talk about a game. Here, white was Cochrane and black was Staunton. This was in 1842 of London. White opened with e4, e5, bishop c4, bishop c5, knight f3, d6, c3, bishop g4. Here is the first critical moment. Bishop g4 is not a good move. How should white react? In the game, Cochrane chose d3. Not a good move. The best move is actually queen b3, double attacking b7 and f7. If black defends f7 with bishop h5, white can even start with d4, and after bishop b6, thwarting the attack on b7, there's de5, de5, knight e5. If black tries queen f6, then how would you react here to the double attack on e5 and f2? The one way out of this is knight d3, but it's enough, and it's decisively better for white. If f4 here, then there's knight c6, and after take and take, the white king cannot castle, and black has pretty good play. When a rook goes to d8, there's going to be some problems, and the knights are going to develop, and black is going to be comfortable. There are not many other moves black can play here. For example, if bishop takes f3, then there's bishop f7, king f8, bishop g8 threatening mate, rook g8, and now gf3, and white remains a pawn up, or black remains a pawn down. Instead, Cochrane chose d3, and the game continued knight f6. This doesn't exist anymore because, for instance, you can castle. And if queen b7, then maybe knight d7. And although black is a pawn down, he has better development, and white has to deal with the threat of taking on f3, doubling the pawns. So after d3, knight f6, castle, castle, we reach this position, h3, bishop h5, bishop e3, bishop b6, very natural response, a4, threatening a5 to an extent, c6, natural, logical, knight bd2, bishop takes is interesting, fe3. The idea here is that after white played knight d2, there's no longer queen d2. So this allows black to take and then to play queen b6, since there's no longer queen d2 holding on to b2 and e3, a double attack. Okay, white reacted queen e1 anyway, because if queen b2, then there's rook b1, and this pawn is hanging. Although this pawn's hanging. First, white chose knight b3, which is a little stronger because this queen is unsafe, and it guards the c3 pawn. d5 was played, rook f2, and now we are about to see imbalanced material situation. Queen f2, dc4, dc4. White's pawns are in shambles, but he has the queen for a rook and a minor. Very dynamic, imbalanced position. Here, black chose knight e4 attacking f2. Queen h4 attacking h5 and e4, but this can be parried by bishop takes f3, gf3, knight c3. And now black is losing actually because this knight is going to be trapped. Pause here and see if you can find white's best move, a double attack. The best move is queen e7, double attacking e5 and b7. So you're threatening to win a knight or a rook by threatening two pawns. For example, after knight a6, there is queen e5, and there's no way to save the knight. You would have to take, but after rook a4, you're a piece up, or you have a queen for a rook in this case. White chose the horrible move king f2. The problem with this move is not only you are missing the opportunity of queen e7, but you are also obstructing the h4 queen's path from e1. In fact, here, you could play queen e1, right? And the knight is trapped. But after king f2, that's no longer possible. Black, not realizing the tactics in this position either, went on to play f6. And now here, white can try king f1 with the idea of queen e1 winning the knight. White didn't see this, and he played knight c5, but anyway, black here should choose something like knight d7 instead. The idea is that if you play king f1 with queen e1 idea, then there's b5, a very strong idea. And if queen e1, then you can play b4, and this knight is suddenly a bone in the throat. If you take instead, then you can play knight f6, and this knight easily escapes, either to b5 or d5. So, instead, black played f6, and after knight c5, knight a6, knight e6 was played, rook f7, rook g1, and rook e8. Here, white blundered rook c1. This is not the right way to approach this position. Here, white has this pressure on the king's side, and he's got a queen for a rook and a piece. When you have a queen for a rook and a piece, this means that you must expose your opponent's king. So after rook c1, that does not take any of that into consideration, because in this queen versus rook and piece position, the king is going to be safe on g8 and with all these pawns. And there's not much white can do after black's next move, knight takes a4. The point here is that black's queenside pawns become very strong and they're going to roll. c5 was played, and knight b2 was played. Rook b1, knight d3, king e2, rook takes e6, because after knight takes c5, these two rooks and piece dominate the queen and piece, since these pawns are going to roll really quickly, and the king cannot be attacked so easily. King e2 was played, and now we see the normal plan. Okay, queen e4 is a good try. f5, okay, a6, queen b3, rook d6, okay. Queen c3 was a mistake here. He should have played queen b2, attacking e5, where when after rook e7 you can fork a6 and g8. Instead it was queen c3, e4, a mistake. Pause and see if you can find the strong idea for white. It involves the threat of a double attack. The best move is queen e5. You're threatening rook takes e6 because after rook takes, you have queen e8 check picking up the rook. You're also threatening to take on e4. And after ef3, king f3, and g6, there's rook c6, take, queen e8, and take. And now this position is pretty unclear from a human standpoint unless you know it, then in which case is a draw. This would have been better for white because black is winning in this position if he doesn't play e4. But after e4, white missed his opportunity, played f4. And now after h6, queen e5 no longer has any danger to it because after king h7, rook takes c6 is no longer possible because you can hold on to all your material. Here rook g1 was played, and then it was rook f6, h4, h5 stopping h5, rook g5, g6, rook g1, a5, another mistake. Here black should play c5 instead. The idea is that c5 is more supportable than a5. You can put a rook behind it and play rook c6, rook c7. And when this happens, white cannot really make any counterplay because white cannot dominate the 7th rank and white does not have time to dominate the 8th rank, and he really can't anyway with the knight on b7 controlling d8. c5 would be a much better move, but black chose a5. It was rook d1, good move, and by the way, this position is equal now because black played a5, and white's plan is queen e8, rook d7, neutralizing some pressure. b4, queen e8, c5, rook d7, king g7, rook d5, okay, rook f7 would draw, but it was rook d5 also fine, c4, rook d7, c3. There was little purpose in this maneuver. White did not need to play his rook back. He could just take immediately. And in fact, this would be much easier because the pawn's on c5. Here, tick, take, and now queen e5, a mistake. It is not a good idea, as a general rule, to throw checks without justification. Instead of queen e5, white could have waited with king d1, tempting black into b4 to b3. Let's see that. King d1. If black plays b3 here, now you can play queen e5 check, double attacking g7 and c3. But by checking first, black improves his king to h7, and now white runs out of checks. And meanwhile, black can strike in the queen side. Roll his pawns, rather. The other problem with queen e5 is that it actually degrades the position of his queen. When the queen was on e8, it was controlling a4, an important square to disallow pawn a4. But after queen e5, a4 is now a threat. And if white tries to go back, then you can play b3. And there's not much to do for white. Here it was queen d5, rook g7, king d1, and now the blunder, rook c7. Here a4 was winning. Very simple. After queen d4, there's rook c7. And the point is that c3 is very strong because the knight is going to come to d3 and control the queening square. For example, after queen takes b4, there's c2, king c1, knight c5, threatening a fork and threatening to promote. Very dangerous and losing for white. So instead, black blundered and played rook c7, and now it's equal because after queen e5, rook d7, king c1, there's not enough. You can play queen b5 here, attacking this, this, this. Here it was rook g7, queen d5, a4, and now white blundered queen b5. This is a blunder because even though you're attacking these two pawns, there's still b3. And the point is that it's impossible to take on a4 because the knight comes to c5 and d3. And in this position, white actually resigned because there's nothing to do about the threat of knight d3 check and then promoting one of the pawns. And okay, this sums up our lesson on double attacks. I think the main takeaway from the examples and the game is that number one, double attacks do not have to be a magic method of winning. There's always a way to react to a double attack, and if your opponent double attacks you, it's not always the end of the world. There's other factors in the position that matter. Number two, double attacks are very common. They're the most common tactical theme to occur, so they're very important to study, including on your own, and I'm sure they will help a lot for your own games. Finally, well, you can see that in the 1842 game here, both sides made a lot of mistakes, and this comes to show how Peoples' technique, even at the highest level, was not very strong. It is much stronger nowadays, and people 2200 rated even play much stronger than either Cochrane or Staunton did in this game. Cochrane missed two good opportunities to double attack his opponent, queen b3 and move 19, queen e7. Then later, he went on to lose the game. And that comes to show how chess is a hard game, but you have to win. You have to play for a win, and you have to master your technique and your tactics. That concludes this video, and I hope you guys do well in your next game.